They found her boots neatly placed outside the tent. But the girl? Gone. No sign of a struggle. No tracks. Just one small handprint pressed on the inside of the nylon wall, far too small to be hers. And the strangest part? That tent had only been zipped from the inside. Out here in the Appalachian wilderness, strange things happen, things that never make the headlines, but haunt local rescue teams, rangers, and backcountry campers for the rest of their lives. The 6 stories you're about to hear are 100% true, verified through public records, police logs, and witness testimonies. Only the names have been changed for privacy, but every event actually happened. If this kind of storytelling grips you, like this video, it helps these stories reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family now. Tell me which story hit you the hardest. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. It fuels this channel to keep bringing you the most chilling stories out there. We weren't supposed to camp that far out. The ranger at the Welcome Center warned us to stick to the marked campsites along the Pine Mountain Trail, preferably near other hikers. The forest feels different out east, he said. Thicker, older. We laughed it off, like every arrogant weekend warrior does. But I remember the way his voice dipped when he added, "Just don't go past Birch Hollow. Folks hear things out there." We went past Birch Hollow by noon. It was me, my brother Mike, and his girlfriend Jess. All 3 of us needed a break from work and city noise. We wanted silence, the kind that didn't come with sirens or neighbor dogs barking through the walls. Mike had mapped out a detour off the trail, a flatter ridgeline, a few miles off the main loop, where the trees opened up just enough to pitch a tent. The view was worth it. From up there, you could see the folds of the Appalachian foothills stretching blue into forever. The only sounds were wind in the trees and the occasional croak of a crow somewhere off the ridge. No reception. No people. Just us. That first evening, we made a fire from deadfall branches and boiled packets of instant chili. We passed around cheap whiskey and watched the stars come out, one by one. Jess dozed off early, and Mike and I stayed up talking about our dad. He used to take us camping when we were kids, before the drinking got bad. By midnight, the wind had died completely. I mean, completely. No rustling leaves, no animal calls. Just this eerie, velvet stillness that settled over everything, like the woods were holding their breath. At around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of giggling, light, high-pitched, and close. Children. For a second, I honestly thought it was a dream, that filtered, echoing kind of laughter, like it was coming through water. I sat up, heart pounding, and glanced at Mike. He was awake, too stiff, blinking. Jess stirred beside him. The giggling came again, right outside the tent, this time. Not playful, not joyous, just strange. No words, just short bursts of laughter, like someone was mimicking the sound of children laughing, without understanding what it meant. Mike whispered, "What the feff is that?" I didn't answer. I reached slowly for the flashlight near my pack and clicked it on. Then, I unzipped the flap and peeked out. The forest was still, too still. I swept the beam across the trees. The light cut through mist that hadn't been there before, clinging low to the ground like smoke. Nothing moved, no figures, no rustling brush. But I swear to God, I felt something looking back, like the trees themselves had eyes. I stepped out fully, barefoot on cold leaves. "Hello?" I called, voice thin and ridiculous in the silence. "Is someone out there?" Mike leaned out behind me. "Kids? You lost?" No answer. Eventually, the wind picked back up and the silence broke. We stood there for a while longer, then went back inside. No one said it out loud, but I could feel it. We all knew something wasn't right. But what do you do? You're 10 miles deep in the woods. No cell service. No roads. You tell yourself it was nothing. A coyote. A weird echo. One of us talking in our sleep. That's what the human brain does. It files the unexplainable into whatever box makes the most sense. So we slept. Lightly. Uncomfortably. And in the morning, we saw them. Tiny handprints. Dozens of them. All over the tent. Pressed into the dew, like they'd been made by little hands, walking circles around us in the night. Some were smudged and chaotic, like the hands had been moving fast. Others were perfectly still, neat palm shapes with curled fingers pressed against the fabric. Mike stared at them without speaking for a long time. Jess looked pale. I crouched and ran my finger over one of the prints. The grass underneath was flattened, damp, but not broken, like they'd been standing still, just watching. Coyotes don't leave. Handprints, Jess finally said. We packed up in silence. No one joked anymore. We started the hike back toward the main trail, but it was slow. Mike kept stopping to check our position, muttering that the ridgeline looked different than yesterday. Jess flinched at every snap of a twig. Even I had trouble keeping my breathing calm. At one point, we passed a tree that looked like it had been clawed 4 parallel scratches in the bark, deep and fresh. Too clean for a bear, too high for a bobcat, but we didn't talk about it. Then, just before dusk, we found the cairn. A small pile of stones off the trail. At first, it looked like a simple marker, like hikers sometimes leave. But these weren't the right kind of stones. They weren't from around there. Smooth river pebbles, some gray, some white, all carefully stacked. And at the base, a child's shoe. Just one, old, worn, canvas fraying at the edges, like it had been there for years, and yet, no moss, no dirt. Mike turned to me and said quietly, "We didn't pass this on the way in." I shook my head. Jess stepped back, her voice shaking. "I want to go home. Tonight." We didn't argue. We hiked well into nightfall, using headlamps and the moon. The trail felt longer than before, stretched somehow. Time passed weirdly. At one point, I checked my watch and realized we'd been walking for 2 hours, but had only covered about 1.5 miles. None of it made sense. Finally, around midnight, we reached the gravel service road where we'd parked. The car was there, thank God, but something stopped me cold. The back window was fogged up, from the inside. Mike wiped it with his sleeve, and there just faintly were more handprints. Tiny, dozens of them, smudged, like they'd been pressed from within. We all just stood there for a long time, staring at the glass. I think that was the moment it changed for me. Not the laughter, not the handprints, not even the shoe. It was the realization that whatever I had followed us out of those woods wasn't in the woods anymore. It was with us. We didn't speak much on the drive back. I took the first shift behind the wheel, just to have something to focus on. Jess sat in the back, curled against the door, pale and quiet. Mike stared out the passenger window like he was trying to remember something he couldn't quite name. We left eastern Kentucky around 2 a.m. and hit I-75 by dawn. There was a part of me that kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something small and pale huddled in the back seat. I kept telling myself it was over, that we were safe, that whatever had happened in those woods didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew better, because the handprints were still there. We tried wiping the glass with a towel at a gas station. Didn't work. The marks were faint but oily, like residue from skin that shouldn't be warm. The more we scrubbed, the more they just smeared. Jess couldn't even look at them. She sat down on the curb while Mike and I took turns with the wiper fluid. "I think I've seen that kind of pile before," he muttered. "What?" "The cairn. That wasn't a hiker thing. I saw something like it in that old survival book. Dad had the one about Appalachian burial customs. Used to be, folks in the hollers would bury unbaptized children in unmarked spots. Stack stones so the spirits couldn't walk. I didn't respond. I just stared at the print near the edge of the window, where a small palm had dragged downward, like it didn't want to leave. We made it back to the city by late morning. Mike dropped Jess off, then crashed at my place for a few hours. None of us went to work that Monday. I thought maybe after a good night's sleep, it would all fade, that I'd wake up and feel stupid for getting spooked. But the dreams started that night. Not nightmares, just whispery things. Half images, a pale face outside my apartment window, a tapping sound that kept changing sides of the room, the giggling again, but slower now, stretched out like a tape warping in heat. By the third night, I started waking up with small bruises on my arms, perfectly round, like fingertips. I didn't tell Mike. I didn't tell anyone, because somewhere deep inside me, a part of me believed I deserved it. 3 weeks passed before I got the text from Jess. Jess, Mike's not answering. You seen him? I'm worried. I hadn't. Last I heard, he'd gone up to visit a friend near Charleston, but now she was saying he never came back. No social media. No texts. Just gone. I drove to his apartment that evening. His car was still parked out front, dusty, unmoved. When I knocked, there was no answer. I looked through the side window and saw the lights were off, but the back hallway glowed faintly with green light, like from a phone left on. I had a key. Inside, the air was stale and sour. The place smelled wrong, like wet earth and mildew, and something faintly metallic, like old coins. The living room was empty. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the table, long gone cold. His bedroom door was closed. When I pushed it open, I froze. On the walls, every inch of them were handprints. Hundreds, all child-sized. Some pressed high, near the ceiling. Some low, near the baseboards. Some overlapping. All of them faint. Gray-brown stains in the paint, like they'd been burned there. The sheets on his bed were crumpled, twisted. The closet door was open. And inside the closet, his hiking pack, still full. He hadn't unpacked since the trip. I left. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I just drove. I didn't know where I was going until I was halfway there. The welcome center at Pine Mountain was mostly closed for the season. Just one truck parked out front. The same ranger was on duty. He recognized me. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said. I told him my brother was missing. He looked at me for a long time before saying, "You went past Birch Hollow, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed, took off his cap, and rubbed his scalp. "I can't prove anything, but I've had stories. Other campers, missing persons, weird signs. You see anything?" I almost didn't tell him, but then I said it. We heard laughter, children, and we found prints, small ones, around our tent, around my car, around my brother's apartment. The ranger went pale. "Do you know about the Mill Creek orphanage?" he asked. I didn't. "It burned down in 1963, he said. "Lightning strike, middle of the night. Whole place went up like kindling. 22 children died. 4 bodies were never recovered." I didn't say anything. He looked out the window, toward the ridgeline. Folks say sometimes the trail bends in weird ways near there, like the woods pull you sideways, and if you hear the children laughing, it means they've seen you. I went back anyway. I had to. It wasn't guilt at first. It was obsession. I retraced our steps back past Birch Hollow, past the twisted pine with the twin trunks, back to the clearing where we'd camped. The fire ring was still there, the leaves around it undisturbed, as if no wind had touched them since. The tent stake holes were still visible in the soil. But something else was there now. Another cairn, newer this time, smaller, topped with a different shoe, Mike's boot. I dropped to my knees. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, listening, because the wind had died again. The forest held its breath. And then faint, close, right behind me, I heard it. Laughter. I turned. Nothing. Just trees. Just fog. But the ground beside me was damp, and in the dew-soaked leaves, clear as day, were new prints. Not just handprints. Footprints, leading away from the cairn. Small, barefoot, wandering. I followed them. I don't know why. They led me down a slope I didn't remember from before. Through briars and brush that didn't scratch. Through a gully that didn't echo. The deeper I went, the harder it got to tell time. The woods changed color. Light grew gray, then gold, then gray again. Eventually, I came to a break in the trees, and there it was, or what was left of it. Stone steps swallowed by vines, charred beams blackened with age, half a chimney still standing, a faint smell of ash, and something else sweet and rotting, the orphanage. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. The air was wet and thick. I moved through rooms that no longer had names. A nursery burned to bones, a hallway with melted railings, and in the back where the floor had collapsed was a basement. I heard breathing, not mine, shallow, fast, like a child, hiding. I took one step toward the stairs, and that's when I saw it. Carved into the wall, over and over again, in childish scrawl, "Let us in." I don't remember how I got out. Not exactly. I remember stumbling, dirt in my mouth, my heart pounding, the sky wrong, my watch frozen at 2:13 a.m. I remember hearing the giggles again close, around me, above me, below me, and then nothing. I woke up at my apartment 2 days later, still in the same clothes. My boots were muddy. There were leaves in my hair. And when I walked into my bathroom and looked in the mirror, there were small, damp fingerprints on the glass. From the inside, it's been 6 months. Mike was never found. They listed him as a missing person, assumed dead. Jess moved to Colorado. The ranger who spoke to me, he quit 2 weeks after my visit. And me? I sleep with the lights on now. But it doesn't help, because sometimes, just before dawn, I hear the laughter again. Close, right behind the wall. And every morning, no matter how many times I clean it, the mirror fogs up, and the handprints come back, small, waiting, watching. They're still out there, waiting for someone else to unzip the tent. I first saw the tent just past the switchback bright nylon, sagging under the weight of rain. Its frame buckled like something had crashed onto it. A red hiking pack lay beside it, half-zipped, soaked through. 2 tin mugs sat near the fire pit. One was still upright. The other had fallen sideways, steamless, cold. But what made my stomach go tight was the blackened skillet still sitting in the embers, with a half-cooked trout curling at the edges. No people, no noise. Just the wind pushing fog through the pines like it was searching for something. We weren't even supposed to be on that stretch of trail. I was out there with my brother Danny, doing our annual fall hike through the Appalachians, something we'd started doing after Dad died. This year, we chose Spruce Knob, West Virginia's highest point. Rugged ridgelines, less foot traffic, more quiet. We'd veered off the main trail the day before, following an old route we found in a topo map Danny brought. He always liked the paths that weren't on. All trails said they felt more real, the kind of trails that made you feel small again. That morning, fog hugged the slopes. Everything was wet. The forest dripped. I remember the squelch of moss under our boots and how the mist made the spruce trunks look like burnt matchsticks in the distance. We were halfway up a ridge, climbing slow, when I noticed the fire pit, then the tent. Danny was the first to say it. Someone just left all this? He crouched near the skillet, poked the fish with his knife. Still raw in the middle. I scanned the ground. No footprints. No drag marks. The tent's fly was half unzipped, sagging open like a mouth. Inside, 2 sleeping bags, gear still inside. A camera, untouched. Canned beans. A book. The air smelled like wet wool and old smoke. No sign of a struggle. But something about it felt wrong, like the moment before a dog growls. I pulled out my phone. No service. Of course. So we made note of the GPS coordinates and decided to keep moving. We'll report it when we hit the next ranger station, Danny said, already stepping away. They probably just got lost. But I remember thinking, why didn't they take their packs? The trail narrowed after that. No signs, just faint blazes on trees that got harder to spot the higher we climbed. At one point, the fog got so thick, we lost the path completely and had to circle back by compass. We didn't talk much after that. The forest felt like it was pressing in. Even Danny got quiet, which wasn't like him. At one point, we stopped to rest, and he muttered, "You hear that?" I didn't, but his head stayed tilted, like he was waiting to hear it again. By late afternoon, we found a ledge just below the ridgeline, a small flat patch with a view into the valley, or what would have been a view if not for the fog. We set up camp, ate granola. Danny filtered water from a muddy runoff creek while I got a fire going. It felt better then, warmer, safer. The tent was zipped, our gear dry. We joked about how many ticks we'd probably have to burn off when we got home. The weirdness from the morning started to feel like just that weirdness. People abandon campsites sometimes, right? Maybe they had an emergency. Maybe they planned to come back. But around 10:30, the forest changed again. We were sitting by the fire, finishing off a bottle of Jim Beam we brought, when I realized the wind had died. No leaves rustling, no owls, just the fire crackling and the faint sound of Danny chewing beef jerky. Then we heard it, a metallic clink, like a fork or tin cup being tapped somewhere up on the ridge. Danny froze. That was a cooking pot. I nodded slowly. The sound came again. 3 short taps. We grabbed our headlamps. The beams cut through the mist, but not far. Every tree looked like a person. Every shadow leaned. Could be the people from that camp, I whispered. Why the hell would they be up here? Now? We scanned the ridge. Nothing moved. Then Danny pointed. There, he whispered. At the very top of the ridgeline, just for a second, I saw what he saw, the faint outline of a figure, standing still. No flashlight, no gear, just upright. I blinked. Gone. We didn't sleep much that night. Every twig snap outside the tent made me grip my knife. Around 3 a.m., I swear, I heard footsteps moving past the tent. Slow, deliberate. But I didn't wake Danny. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, knife in hand, listening. By dawn, the fog had thickened again. We broke camp in silence. Neither of us brought up what we saw. It felt unreal in daylight. We hiked hard the rest of the morning. Just before noon, we hit a ranger outpost, a small brown building with a faded flag and a damp notebook for trail logs. I told the ranger about the campsite. He barely looked up. That makes 3 this year, he said. I paused. 3 what? Campsites like that, he said. Up on that ridge. Gear left behind. Meals half cooked. No sign of the people. Last one was a couple from Ohio. Before that, a solo backpacker. We hiked in a few times. No tracks, no signs of a struggle. It's like they just wandered off. Danny and I stood there, silent. The ranger looked at me a moment, then added, "Trail's unofficial. Wasn't marked on modern maps. Some say that ridge has old logging lines that loop back on themselves. Easy to get turned around." I nodded slowly, but deep down, I already knew. It wasn't the trail that was wrong. It was something about that ridge. We should have left that day. We should have taken the ranger's warning, signed the trail log, and headed back the way we came. But Danny wanted one more night, just one, and I didn't argue. He wanted to camp at the base of the ridge again, near a spot we'd passed on the way up. Said he liked the creek there. Said it would close the loop. That phrase stuck in my head all afternoon. Close the loop. It didn't feel right. We hiked back through the fog, past where the first camp had been. But now, it wasn't there. The tent, the pack, the mugs, the skillet, all gone. The fire pit was still there, but cold, old, like it hadn't been touched in weeks. No sign we'd ever seen what we saw. I asked Danny if we were on the wrong switchback. He didn't answer. We made camp anyway. No fire this time, everything was damp, and we didn't feel like talking. We each ate in silence, our freeze-dried meals tasting like cardboard. The woods felt heavier than before, the kind of quiet that makes you think you've gone deaf. That night, sleep didn't come. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of something brushing against the tent. Not wind, not branches, a dragging sound. Then, something clicked near my head, like a metal buckle tapping fabric. "Danny," I whispered. No response. I turned. His sleeping bag was empty. My throat locked. I sat up fast, unzipped the tent, and called out too loud. "Danny!" Fog everywhere. My breath puffed out like smoke signals. My flashlight caught nothing but trees and mist. I checked the trail. I checked the creek. I called his name again. No answer. Then, faintly the sound of footsteps, crunching wet leaves uphill. I followed. Against every instinct, I followed. The forest blurred. Fog thick as wool. The slope got steeper. Trees turned to jagged silhouettes. I climbed for what felt like an hour until I broke through to a clearing near the top of the ridge, and there he was. Standing at the edge of the overlook, back to me, arms limp at his sides. "Danny!" I called again, relief bursting in my chest. But he didn't turn. He was staring into the mist, frozen. I stepped closer. My boots cracked a branch. He flinched like he hadn't heard me until then. When he finally turned, his face was pale, lips cracked, eyes hollow. "You hear it?" he whispered. "Hear what?" He pointed. "Behind me." I turned. There, barely visible through the fog, were faint outlines, 6, maybe 7 tents, all arranged in a crescent around a clearing. Old, sun-bleached, some collapsed, some still upright. One still had a camp chair out front. I blinked hard. When I looked again, they were gone. Danny was crying now. "I saw her," he whispered. "Who?" "I don't know." She was standing by the fire, just staring. Then she turned and walked into the woods. "There's no fire," I said. There was. He wouldn't come back down. I had to pull him, literally guide him step by step down the slope. And that's when I realized we were looping. We passed the same twisted spruce with the clawed bark 3 times. I carved an X in the trunk with my knife. A few minutes later, we passed it again. Time bled. The sun never rose. Our watches were dead. The woods felt tilted, like we were inside a snow globe slowly being shaken. I kept thinking about the ranger's words, old logging lines that loop back on themselves. We weren't on a trail anymore. We were inside something. Danny stopped eating, stopped drinking. He muttered in his sleep, names I didn't recognize. He'd wake up and ask where Dad was. Dad, who'd been dead 5 years. By the 3rd night, I couldn't wake him at all. I dragged him down the ridge on a tarp. By some grace, or maybe just a cruel trick, we stumbled back onto a real trail late the next afternoon. A marker. A number. By dusk, I made it to a fire road and flagged down a Forest Service truck. I don't remember how I explained what happened. I remember the flashlight beams, the stretcher, the oxygen mask. I remember the taste of blood in my mouth from biting my own tongue. Danny recovered physically, but he doesn't remember anything after the skillet. Says we must have imagined the rest. That we got lost. That the weather messed with us. That fear does strange things. But sometimes he wakes up screaming. Sometimes he won't go near the woods at all. I went back once, 2 weeks later, I parked near the ranger station and hiked in. The trail log was gone, replaced by a newer book. No mention of our entry. When I asked the new ranger on duty about the missing hikers, he blinked like I was speaking another language. No reports like that this year, he said. Pretty quiet season, honestly. I didn't argue, but I kept the XI carved into that tree. I hiked until I found it again. Except this time, there were 5 X's, each one deeper than the last, each one older than the last, like someone had kept coming back, or like someone had never really left. I still don't know what we found on that ridge, but sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the skillet again, and the fish is still cooking. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I just remember the cold, the kind that settles into your bones wet, Appalachian cold. I'd camped alone before, but something about this stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway felt different, too still, like the woods were holding their breath. I'd parked at a small pull-off, a few miles from Craggy Gardens, set up camp just past dusk, and eaten a cheap dinner by headlamp. The tent was pitched on mossy ground that sucked in sound. Even my footsteps had felt muted, like I was walking on old velvet. It was a Thursday in mid-October. No tourists, no traffic. No one knew I was here. Around midnight, the breathing started. Slow, steady, rhythmic, right outside the nylon wall of my tent. At first, I thought it was the wind, or an animal, but this wasn't rustling. It wasn't movement. It was breathing. Just inches from where my head lay on the sleeping pad. Inhale, hold, exhale. Long pauses. Too deliberate to be wind. Too heavy to be deer. My body locked up instantly. Every instinct I had screamed not to move, not to make a sound. My face was turned toward the tent wall, eyes wide open, staring at the taut green fabric just 6 inches from my nose. I could almost feel the breath moving through the thin material, warm and moist against the freezing air. I don't know how long I stayed like that. An hour, maybe more. My heart was beating so loud I was sure it would give me away. Then it stopped. No slow fade. Just gone. Like someone holding their breath mid-sentence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The frost crackled on the fly sheet. My bladder screamed. My legs cramped. But I didn't move, not until the birds started. That faint pre-dawn chorus. First the warblers, then the tuies. The faintest blue just bleeding into the sky. I slowly unzipped the tent, careful not to tug too fast, the sound razor sharp in the quiet. I expected to see nothing. Just my car, the trees, the pull-off behind me. But there it was. One single boot print, stamped clean in the frost just outside the tent's sidewall. Not mine, not part of any track, just one, toes pointed toward me. That's what made my stomach drop the direction. Like someone had stood there, facing me, for God knows how long. No second print, no stride, no pattern. Just one heavy press into the thin layer of frozen dew. It hadn't melted. That meant it was fresh, recent. Someone had stood there within the hour. I circled the tent. No other signs. No broken branches. No animal tracks. No condensation trails from breath. And no other footprints not leading away, not doubling back. Just one. I took a photo on my phone. The battery had dropped to 18%, despite being fully charged the night before. I shoved it in my pocket, struck camp in under 10 minutes, and didn't eat or drink a thing. I just shoved everything into the back of the car and drove. The frost hadn't even melted off the windshield. I didn't tell anyone. It didn't feel big enough to justify the fear it put in me. A single boot print in the frost just sounds like something you'd forget after a few days. Except I didn't. Because that night, back home, I found dirt on the carpet by my bed. Not mud, not tracked in. Just a few flecks, like the kind you'd find under a boot that's been standing in wet moss. I convinced myself it was old, or I tracked it in myself. That worked for a while. A few days passed, then a week. I couldn't sleep well, kept waking up at odd times, thinking I heard footsteps on hardwood that didn't exist. The boot print haunted me. I kept looking at the photo, zooming in, enhancing shadows, like it would give me answers. It didn't. 10 days later, I checked the photo again, and this is the part I haven't told anyone. The photo changed. Not the composition, the boot print was still there. Same frost crystals, same light. But something else was now visible in the corner. Faint, shadowed, but clear enough once. I saw it. A second boot print, blurred and partial, just touching the edge of the frame. I swear on everything that was not there before. I compared it with the original backup on my cloud. That version didn't have the second print. Only the copy on my phone did. I didn't know what to do. I felt insane. I stopped camping. I even tried deleting the photo, but it wouldn't delete. Every time I removed it, it came back within hours, in the same folder, same timestamp. And last night, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the sound of breathing. But this time, it was inside the tent. Only, I wasn't in a tent anymore. I was in my bed, and the air smelled like frost. The scent hit me first. That sharp, earthy cold you only smell in the mountains right before dawn, a mix of wet bark, dying leaves, and frost on rock. It didn't belong in my bedroom. I sat upright in the dark, heart pounding, sheets tangled around my legs. I was sweating, but the air felt freezing. My breath fogged faintly in the dim light coming through the curtains. Then came the sound. Inhale, hold, exhale. Right behind me. I spun so fast I nearly fell out of bed, but no one was there. Just my bedroom door, slightly ajar. The hallway behind it empty. I stared at that gap for minutes. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Eventually, I turned on every light in the apartment. No one was here. I checked the locks, the windows, even the closet, all locked, undisturbed. I stood in the hallway for over an hour, just listening. Not for footsteps, but for that breath. It didn't return. Not that night. But the dirt did. More of it this time. A fine, crescent-shaped smear of mud just inside the bathroom door, like someone had stepped in, pivoted once, and vanished. No trail in, no trail out. Just that one partial arc. I didn't clean it. I just sat on the closed toilet lid and stared at it until the sun came up. By the end of that week, I stopped trusting time. It wasn't obvious at first. I'd forget. A minute here, a few seconds there. I'd walk into the kitchen and realize I had no memory of standing up. I'd look at the clock and see whole chunks of the day missing, like skipped scenes from a film. My phone's call log showed numbers I didn't recognize. My search history had strange entries. How to know if you're dreaming, hypnopompic hallucinations, stages of frostbite. I didn't remember typing any of that. One night, I woke up and found my tent pitched in the middle of my living room, fully set up, sleeping bag unzipped, flashlight resting inside. There was dirt on the tarp floor, damp and cold like it had come from a forest. But the locks on the door still latched. I couldn't bring myself to touch the tent for 2 days. I slept on the couch, jumping at every creak. Finally, I collapsed the thing and shoved it in the hallway closet, buried it behind coats and boxes I hadn't opened since college. The next night, I dreamed I was back at the pull-off, off the Blue Ridge Parkway. Only, it wasn't a dream, because I woke up inside the tent, not on the couch, not in my apartment, inside the tent. In the woods. Same trees. Same mossy clearing. My car parked right where I'd left it 2 weeks ago. But here's the part I can't explain. My watch still said 2:13 a.m. I stumbled out into the night, heart jackhammering. The frost was thick on everything. The tent walls, my boots, even the windshield of my car. I tried the door unlocked. My keys were on the dash. I turned on the interior light. The back seat was filled with mud, not like someone tracked it in, more like someone had been sitting there, wet and silent, for hours. That broke me. I got in the car and drove like hell, tires skidding on wet leaves, nearly veering into the guardrail more than once. The tent, the frost, the clearing, I left it all behind. When I got home, the first thing I did was check the closet. The tent was still there, still collapsed, still dusty, still dry. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I started writing things down. Notes to myself. What I'd done, what I'd eaten, what time I left the house. I taped them to the wall so I could check them every morning, but the notes started changing. Slight variations, a word added, one crossed out, a time adjusted. One morning, the note I'd written in blue pen was now black ink in handwriting that didn't quite look like mine. That same day, I checked my trail cam from the original trip. I'd left it running in the woods near the campsite, motion triggered, aimed at the tree line. There was only one photo on the SD card. It showed me, asleep in the tent. But something was wrong. The timestamp was 3 days ago. I hadn't been camping in weeks, and there, right outside the tent wall, was a figure, not fully visible, just the lower half. One boot, frost clinging to the laces, and this time it was turned away from the tent, like it had been watching and was finally walking off. I stared at the screen, numb. I thought I'd feel relief, but I didn't, because when I turned back toward the hallway, I saw it, just past the open bedroom door. A wet boot print, in my hallway, facing the wall, and underneath it, written faintly in what looked like mud, were the words, "I waited." Every night since, I checked the hallway, and every night, the boot prints are facing closer. They were still warm. I remember that part the most, the heat radiating off the lighter, sitting neatly on top, like someone had just set it down seconds before we rounded the bend. We were somewhere along the Forney Ridge Trail, a few miles west of Clingman's Dome. My buddy Nate had found a shortcut on an old hiker's blog, not official, not marked. Just a narrow runoff trail that curved around a switchback and dropped us lower into the valley. He said it'd save us an hour, maybe 2, and we'd get a quieter spot to pitch the tent away from the tourist traffic. The fog had been drifting in since late afternoon, crawling over the ridge like it knew something we didn't. By the time we reached the turnoff, the shadows between trees had thickened. The woods looked wet even where it hadn't rained, moss bleeding down the trunks, rocks slick and dark like they'd been sweating. I didn't like the shortcut. Something about how silent it got as soon as we started down it, like the trees had swallowed the wind. But Nate, always chasing the thrill of isolation, was already halfway down the slope by the time I voiced it. So I kept going, kept telling myself it was just me being twitchy. We'd hiked dozens of trails together before, pitched in worse places, dealt with worse weather. Then we saw the clothes, stacked, perfectly. A red flannel shirt folded over a pair of dark jeans, rolled up white socks on top, like they'd come fresh from a dryer. A silver lighter sat dead center on the pile. No wallet, no phone, no boots or sneakers, just clothing, still carrying body heat. We stood there for a minute, not speaking. I remember brushing my hand over the flannel. It wasn't damp like everything else around us. It was dry and soft, like it had just been taken off. Nate said something like, maybe someone went skinny dipping, but there wasn't water nearby. Not unless you hiked back a mile toward the creek. He kept glancing around, like maybe someone was about to come out of the woods laughing, like it was a prank, but no one did. We kept walking. I didn't want to, but Nate was already moving again, brushing it off. Let's get some distance. We'll report it at the ranger station in the morning. The air got colder after that. Still no wind, just fog and damp, and this weird, subtle tension building in my spine, like I was waiting for something to crash through the trees behind us. We made camp before, full dark, set up the tent in a small clearing, a few hundred yards uphill from the trail. Nate started a fire. I laid out our food bags, but neither of us ate much. I think we were both still thinking about that pile. He joked about it once more, said, "If I disappear in the night, check the trail for my pants." It wasn't funny, but we laughed anyway. That brittle, forced kind of laugh that says, "Let's pretend this is normal." It was sometime after 2 a.m. when I woke up. I didn't sit up or call out. I just opened my eyes to the black shape of the tent's roof above me and knew, in that deep, instinctive part of the brain we don't listen to enough, that something was wrong. The fire had long since died. I could hear water dripping somewhere, thick drops falling onto leaves, maybe from a branch. But it wasn't raining. And then I realized Nate wasn't beside me. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make noise. The forest was pitch. No moon. Fog hovering like it had weight. And there, not 20 feet from the tent, Nate was standing barefoot in the clearing, wearing nothing but boxers and a blank stare. His arms hung loose by his sides, shoulders slack, no flashlight, no shoes. Just standing there, facing the trees like he was waiting for something. I called his name once. He didn't react. I called again, louder. Still nothing. By the time I climbed out and touched his shoulder, he blinked, flinched hard, like he'd just been yanked from a dream. "What the hell, man?" I whispered, voice shaking. "You're gonna freeze out here." He looked at me like he didn't understand the words, said, "I thought I heard my name." I helped him back into the tent, gave him my hoodie. He was shivering by then, confused but insistent that he hadn't sleepwalked before, that he'd never done anything like that. He kept mumbling that he didn't even remember taking off his clothes. By dawn, the fog had started to lift, though the sky was still a pale bruise. We decided to pack up early. The shortcut trail didn't feel right anymore. Neither of us wanted to admit we were scared, but we moved fast. I offered to carry his bag, and that's when I noticed it, folded, sitting dead center, just outside the tent flap, his clothes. Jeans, flannel, socks, laid out in the exact same way as the pile we saw on the trail, and on top of the stack, resting quietly, was the same silver lighter, still warm. I didn't say anything right away, just stared at the stack of clothes, jaw clenched so tight it felt like my molars might crack. I could feel the heat of the lighter pulsing into my palm like a heartbeat, like it knew it wasn't supposed to be there. Nate was inside the tent, still trying to find his boots. He hadn't seen it yet. I thought about hiding it, sweeping the clothes into my pack, telling him we needed to leave now, before either of us said something we couldn't unsay. But the second I stepped back toward the tent, Nate leaned out and froze. "That mine?" he asked. His voice was flat, not scared, not confused, just blank, like he was asking about something ordinary. "Yeah," I said quietly. He didn't respond, didn't move, just stared at the folds of denim and cotton like he was waiting for them to get up and walk. The silence between us stretched until it snapped. "I didn't do that," he said suddenly, stepping back, like the pile might reach out and grab him. "I didn't fold those. I don't remember leaving the tent again." I didn't argue. I just nodded, because the truth was, I'd been awake ever since he came back in. I would have heard him move. The zipper hadn't budged all night. We both knew that. We left the clearing without eating. The shortcut trail felt longer going back, like it had warped somehow. I kept thinking about how wrong it all was, how the lighter was warm again. Not just once, twice, which meant someone had touched it recently. And the part that kept nagging at me, even more than the clothes, Nate didn't smoke. By the time we reached the main trail, we were both limping from the cold and the wet. I kept glancing behind us, half expecting to see another stack of clothes just sitting in the path, waiting like a marker. But nothing followed us out, nothing visible anyway. At the Klingman's Dome parking lot, I told Nate I was heading to the ranger station. I wanted to report it, log it, do something. But when I got there, the ranger on duty just nodded slowly when I described what we found. He didn't write anything down, just sipped his coffee and said, "Yeah, that happens sometimes." "What do you mean happens?" "Folks hike out, get tired, strip down and wander. Disorientation mostly. Elevation messes with your head if you're not used to it." Okay, but this was folded, clean, neat, and there was a lighter, warm, twice. He finally looked up at that. "Twice?" I nodded. He didn't say anything else after that, just stared at me like maybe he believed me, but didn't want to. Then he said the thing I still can't shake. "You saw clothes on the trail," he said. "Did you ever see the person?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, because no, we didn't. Not the first time, not the second, not even when Nate had walked barefoot into the clearing, his eyes dull and blank, like something had called him there. That night, we checked into a cheap motel in Cherokee, slept with the bathroom light on. Nate kept rubbing his arms like he was cold, even though the heater was on full blast. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silver lighter again, resting quietly on flannel, still warm like someone was trying to leave a message. By morning, Nate was gone. His bag, his keys, his boots, all still there. Door locked from the inside, but his clothes, gone. All of them. I tore through the room, checked the closet, under the bed, even the motel laundry chute. Nothing. No note. No sound. Just the faint smell of wood smoke. The police didn't help much. Took a statement, filed a report, suggested maybe he'd wandered out and had some kind of episode, maybe even planned it. But I knew Nate. He wasn't like that. I went back to the trail a week later, parked near the same lot, waited until dusk. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Closure, maybe. Proof that it hadn't all been in our heads. I found the shortcut again. But the trail was different. Overgrown. Barely visible. Like it hadn't been used in years. The blog post Nate found? Gone. Link dead. No archive. I forced my way down the path anyway, heart hammering so loud I swear I could hear it in my ears. The air turned colder with every step. The fog rolled in fast, too fast, and the trees leaned closer like they were listening. The clearing was still there, and in the center of it, right where our tent had been, was a stack of folded clothes. Nate's red flannel, his jeans, rolled socks, and the lighter. Still warm. I didn't touch it. Didn't even step close. I just stood there and whispered, "I'm sorry," to the trees. Because I should have stopped him. Should have turned us around when we saw the first pile. Should have listened to that ancient, primal voice in the back of my skull that said something wasn't right. Instead, I'd followed him deeper. Let the silence take root. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see him standing there barefoot again. Arms limp, eyes hollow, waiting for something I'll never understand. I still carry the lighter. It doesn't work, doesn't spark. But sometimes, when the nights are cold and the fog rolls in past my window, I swear I can feel it warming in my pocket, like someone's holding it, waiting. I still carry the lighter. It doesn't spark. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I swear I feel it warming in my pocket. I first heard the whistling just after midnight. At first, I thought it was Owen half asleep, maybe breathing through his teeth the way he does when he's dreaming. But then it rose and fell again. Clear this time, deliberate, a tune. 4 notes, a pause, then 3 more. It came from somewhere down the hollow, soft but sharp enough to cut through the wind. We were camped off an old fire road outside Harlan County, Kentucky, a few miles from where the old mine shafts collapse into brush and rock. The map showed nothing out here but a dotted trail that disappeared halfway up the ridge. That's exactly why we'd picked it. No service, no traffic, just a weekend to disappear into the quiet. It had been a perfect evening, fire crackling, bourbon in tin mugs, stars like cold pinholes above the tree line. The woods here felt heavier than anywhere I'd camped before. Taller trees, thicker air. Even our voices sounded muffled, swallowed before they could echo back. The whistling broke that quiet, like something foreign pushing its way in. Owen stirred in his sleeping bag. "You hear that?" I whispered. He grunted, rubbed his eyes. "Coyotes. Coyotes don't whistle." He didn't answer. The sound came again, this time from the opposite direction. Same rhythm. 4 notes. Pause. 3 notes. Only now it sounded closer, as if the trees themselves were breathing it out. I sat up and unzipped the tent. The forest beyond the nylon flap was black-green and glistening with dew. I could smell wet earth and the faint tang of coal dust that never really leaves these hills. The moonlight barely made it through the branches. "Owen," I said quietly, "it's moving." He clicked on his headlamp. The beam caught the thin fog drifting low to the ground. Nothing moved beyond it. The whistling stopped. For a long minute, we just listened. Crickets. Wind in the pines. Our own breathing. Then Owen muttered, "Probably some local kid screwing around." He zipped his bag back up and turned away. But I couldn't shake it. The next morning, I woke to a stillness so complete it felt staged. No birds, no bugs, just the slow drip of condensation from the tarp. Owen was crouched by the edge of the campsite, staring at something between 2 trees. "Look at this," he said. A length of twine stretched between the trunks, maybe 10 feet across. Hanging from it were small wooden figurines, rough carved from bark and twigs, no bigger than a hand. Some had faces burned in with a lighter. Others were missing heads entirely. There were 6 of them, swinging gently in the morning breeze. One wore a shred of blue fabric, tied around its middle, the exact color of my jacket. "Jesus," I said. "When did you see this?" "Just now. They weren't here last night." The twine was tied tight, the knots deliberate. Whoever did it had been close enough to our tent to touch the stakes. I scanned the tree line. No footprints, no broken branches, just mist rising off the moss and the faint smell of smoke that didn't belong to our fire. Owen tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. "Maybe someone left it before we got here. Some art thing." "Yeah," I said. "Sure." But deep down, I knew the twine was new. The bark still had fresh cuts where the string had been looped. Someone had worked in silence, only a few feet from where we slept. We decided to hike up the ridge, get some elevation, maybe find cell service. The trail wound steeply upward, switchback after switchback, until my lungs burned. Halfway up, I looked back. Our campsite was barely visible through the fog, a pale scar of flattened grass and ash. The higher we climbed, the quieter it got. Every sound seemed to die a few feet from its source. No wind, no echo. Just that low-frequency hum that fills your ears when the world goes still. At the top, we found the remnants of an old lookout tower, just the concrete base, and a few rusted bolts. Owen dropped his pack and pulled out a protein bar. "No signal," he said, holding his phone up. "Figures. Let's eat and head down before dark." He nodded, but his eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on something in the tree line below. "Do you see that?" he said. At first, I didn't. Then I caught it, something pale, moving between the trees, far down the slope. It wasn't a person exactly, more like the hint of one, a suggestion of shoulders, a flash of movement, then gone. We stood there, frozen, until the forest swallowed the shape. Owen forced a laugh. "Probably a hiker, or a deer." "Deer don't whistle," I said. We made it back to camp by dusk. The figurines were gone. The twine still hung, but the space between the knots was empty, frayed at the ends, as if something had been ripped free. That night, the whistling returned. At first, it came from far down, the hollow distant enough to question if it was real. But then it circled. One echo from the left, another from behind. Always the same rhythm. I tried recording it on my phone, but the mic picked up nothing but static. Owen told me to lie down, said we'd pack up and leave at first light. He was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the tightness in his voice. Hours passed. The fire burned to embers. I drifted between sleep and waking, my mind playing tricks. Each time I opened my eyes, the tent fabric seemed closer, the shadows sharper. Then came a new sound, soft footfalls, crunching leaves just beyond the tent wall. Owen bolted upright. "You hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, something brushed the side of the tent, a fingertips pressure, slow, deliberate, dragging along the nylon. We held our breath. Another sound followed, a faint click against the aluminum pole, like fingernails tapping metal. Then, silence. We stayed like that until dawn, afraid to move. When I finally stepped outside, the air was heavy with fog, thick enough to taste. Our gear was scattered, nothing missing, just moved. My boots had been turned around, facing the woods. The ashes from the fire pit had been scooped into a small circle, perfectly symmetrical. Owen stood a few yards away, staring at something nailed to a tree. It was one of the figurines, except this one was carved in more detail. It had a tiny strip of red fabric tied around its wrist, Owen's bandana. Its face was scratched with a knife point into a crude smile. "What the hell is happening?" he muttered. I took a step closer and saw a faint smudge of soot beneath the figurine, like someone had pressed their thumb there after hanging it. A single fingerprint. We packed fast, barely speaking. I could feel the pressure of the hills around us, as if the forest itself had drawn closer overnight. Every sound, our footsteps, the zip of our packs, seemed too loud, too intrusive. We followed the trail back toward the car, but after an hour, nothing looked familiar. The slope felt wrong, the bend steeper, the trees older. It was as if we'd somehow veered into a different hollow altogether. Then came the whistle. Again, soft, patient, and closer than ever. Owen froze. "Behind us," he whispered. I turned, but there was only fog. Then it answered from ahead. Same rhythm. 4 notes. Pause. 3. That's when I realized it wasn't echoing. It was mimicking. There were at least 2 of them. We broke into a run, crashing through undergrowth until the trail vanished entirely. My chest burned, my vision blurred. Somewhere behind, I could still hear Owen shouting, but his voice was swallowed by the hills. When I stopped to catch my breath, the world tilted in silence. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then the whistle came again, this time right beside me, almost gentle. I turned toward the sound, but there was no one there. Just a string of twine hanging from 2 trees, sagging under its own weight. At the center hung a single new figurine. This one wore a scrap of blue fabric, my jacket. The figurine swayed on its string, barely moving in the still air. I remember the sound it made, just a faint wooden creak, like the hinge of an old door opening an inch. My throat went dry. I should have run. Instead, I stepped closer. The blue fabric tied around its middle wasn't a scrap. It was the torn cuff of my sleeve. The edges were damp, frayed, as if ripped that morning. I touched it without thinking. The wood was cold, freshly carved, splinters sharp at the edges. Somewhere behind me, branches snapped. "Owen?" I called out. No answer, just the wind stirring the leaves, the low sigh of the forest shifting on its own. I shouted his name again. This time, there was an echo, but it came from the wrong direction. That's when I heard it, the whistle. 4 notes. Pause. 3. Then another, fainter, overlapping from farther off, like 2 voices, harmonizing in some patient, sick rhythm. I turned in circles, trying to locate it. The sound bounced through the trees in ways that didn't make sense. It was as if the hills themselves were breathing the tune back at me. I ran. The woods changed as I moved paths that should have curved uphill, now dipped into hollows I didn't recognize. Trees grew closer together, their trunks pale and slick with moss. The smell of wet earth grew stronger, mixed with something metallic. I followed what looked like an old creek bed, half dry, until I saw footprints in the mud. 2 sets. One was mine, pressed deep from my boots. The other was bare. The bare prints trailed alongside mine for a while, then veered off into the brush. That's when I started hearing Owen's voice again, soft, strained. "Ian, this way." I froze. I hadn't told him to move. How could he know where this way was? "Owen!" I yelled. "Stay where you are." But his voice came again, from deeper in the trees. "This way." Always the same phrase, always calm. I followed the sound anyway, crashing through the brush, calling his name until my throat ached. Each time I thought I was close, the voice shifted direction. It wasn't until I reached the clearing that I realized how wrong everything was. There, half hidden in fog, stood the remains of an old shack. The roof had caved in on one side, the door long gone, replaced by a curtain of hanging vines. A rusted stovepipe leaned at an angle, and beside it sat an iron wash basin filled with rainwater. I should have turned around. Instead, I stepped inside. The air smelled like damp wood and iron. The floor was covered in carvings, hundreds of them, small wooden figurines scattered in every corner. Some were crude, others almost delicate, with tiny notches forming faces, hands, even clothes. I crouched to pick one up, and my stomach turned. Each one wore a shred of colored fabric, faded blues, reds, and greens, different materials, different ages. In the center of the floor was a stump, smooth on top, dark-stained, with shavings all around. Whoever had been making them did it right here. My eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the boards. That's when I noticed the wall. Pinned there, in a neat, perfect line, were photographs, old Polaroids, curling at the edges. Campers, hikers, pairs, just like us. Some photos had dates scrawled on them years apart. 2009, 2014, 2020. And in the most recent one, 2 men beside a fire, laughing, a blue jacket draped over a log. Me and Owen. My stomach dropped. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe hard enough to make the shack creak. That's when the whistling started again, close inside. I spun toward the sound, but the shack was empty. The whistle grew louder, circling the walls, bouncing from corner to corner. Then, slowly, it began to slow down, until it matched my heartbeat. I bolted outside. The fog was thicker now, so dense, it swallowed everything more than a few feet away. The woods didn't look like woods anymore, just shapes, outlines, wrong, proportions. I shouted for Owen again, but the sound came out hoarse, useless. Then I heard something behind me, footsteps, bare, slow, deliberate. I didn't turn at first. I couldn't. My body refused to obey. The steps stopped a few feet away. The air shifted, cold and close. Then, right next to my ear, someone whistled the tune quietly, perfectly in rhythm. I ran again, blind through the fog, snagging my jacket on thorns, stumbling over roots. My headlamp flickered, then died. The only light came from the faint dawn pushing through the mist. I didn't stop until I hit the creek again. That's where I found Owen's pack ripped open, contents scattered. His flashlight lay half buried in the mud, still on. And beside it, half submerged in the water, was one of the figurines. It was carved into the shape of a man holding something small in his hand, something that looked like a whistle. The whistle itself was gone. I don't remember the next few hours clearly. I must have followed the creek until it widened. Then the ground leveled out and the trees began to thin. At some point, I saw the glint of metal my car. The relief hit so hard it made me dizzy. I half-crawled the last stretch, fell against the driver's door, and locked it as soon as I got inside. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I looked up at the ridge. The fog still clung to it like smoke. Somewhere up there, faint and distant, the whistling started again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from one place. It came from several. By the time I reached the ranger station, the sun was fully up. The woman behind the counter looked startled when she saw me. "Sir, are you hurt?" I told her what happened, where we'd camped, the figurines, the noises, the shack. She listened quietly, then exchanged a glance with the deputy standing by the map wall. When I mentioned the photographs, the deputy's face tightened. "You said you were near Harlan Hollow?" "Yeah, maybe a mile west of the Cardi ridgeline." He looked at the ranger. "That area is supposed to be closed off. Land's been condemned since the floods. Old mining property." I shook my head. "There's a trail. We followed it off the fire road." "There shouldn't be," he said. "They sent a search team that afternoon. I went with them, but the deeper we went, the more everything blurred together. The terrain looked wrong again. No clearing, no shack, no twine between the trees. Just forest. Endless forest. By dusk, they found Owen's flashlight and his torn bandana hanging from a branch. Nothing else. When they asked if I remembered the tune, I tried to whistle it. My lips trembled. The sound that came out wasn't mine. It was too clean, too perfect. The deputy stared at me for a long time. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. "It's been 6 months. Every night, I wake around 12:14 a.m. the same time I first heard it. At first, there's nothing. Then, a faint whistle threads through the quiet, as if someone's pacing just beyond my window. 4 notes. Pause. 3. I moved twice since then. Changed my number. Deleted every GPS app on my phone. None of it matters. Sometimes, when I drive through the back roads outside town, I'll glance at the tree line and catch a flash of blue between the trunks, like a jacket sleeve, moving out of sight. And once, just once, I found something hanging from my back porch railing. A small wooden figurine, carved with perfect care. This one didn't have any fabric tied to it, but when I looked closer, I saw it wasn't finished. There was a knife mark still halfway through the chest, and above it, in letters burned dark into the wood, was one single word. Wait. Every night since, the whistling starts closer, like whoever carved the first one isn't finished with me yet. The first sound that woke me wasn't the wind. It was static, sharp, wet, alive, crackling from somewhere inside my tent. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. The forest was still, just the low breath of rain moving through pine needles. But the noise was real, an electric hiss, rising and falling like someone turning a dial just out of range. It was coming from my pack. I didn't carry a radio. I'd driven up into the Monongahela alone that afternoon, following an old service road that wound through miles of fog-soaked timber. The ranger map showed a decommissioned fire tower near the ridge, one of those skeletal iron things left over from the 60 seconds. That was where I planned to camp. The weather had been cold enough that my breath hung white in the cab as I drove. When the road finally ended, I parked beside a rusted gate and hiked the last half-mile in silence. No birds, no distant engines, just the thick hush of the hills. By dusk, I'd set up near the base of the tower. Its frame creaked in the wind, like something remembering how to move. I built a small fire, cooked beans straight from the can, and watched the fog roll in until it swallowed the trees whole. It should have felt peaceful. It didn't. The static sputtered again. I unzipped the pack and dug through the pockets, flashlight, map, knife, extra batteries. The sound stopped the instant my hand brushed the nylon. For a long time, I just knelt there, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly, the tower above me groaned, and somewhere far off, thunder crawled over the mountains. I told myself it was interference, maybe my emergency beacon picking up a stray frequency. But when I pressed the test button, it was dead. Battery pulled. I laughed once, quietly, like you do when you don't believe yourself. Then, I zipped the bag and lay back down. Sleep didn't come easy. Sometime around 2 a.m., the forest changed. The usual nighttime noises, crickets, branches shifting, the drip of condensation fell away all at once. The air turned dense, pressing against the tent fabric. That's when the static came again, louder. And this time, underneath the hiss, there was a voice. It was faint, fractured by bursts of white noise, but I could make out a shape in the sound, something that might have been my name. I froze. Every instinct said, "Don't move." The voice dragged through the static like someone trying to speak underwater. The syllables stretched and warped until they no longer sounded human. I sat there, heart slamming, staring at the dark outline of my pack. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. At first light, I stepped outside. The fog hadn't lifted. It just turned paler, like milk poured through the trees. The tower loomed above, its top platform hidden in cloud. I walked the perimeter of camp, nothing disturbed, no tracks but mine. I checked the pack again. Everything was normal, dry, ordinary. Still, I kept the radio beacon out this time, set it on a stump beside the fire pit, and waited. Hours passed. The forest slowly came alive again. Sparrows, distant woodpecker, the hum of something small moving through wet leaves. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. By late afternoon, curiosity had started to outweigh fear. I climbed the tower. The ladder rungs were slick with rust, and the higher I went, the more the fog thickened. Halfway up, I could no longer see the ground. The world below dissolved into gray. At the top, the observation deck was half-rotted, planks missing, nails rising like teeth. The small cabin that once housed the ranger's equipment still stood, door hanging open. Inside, the smell of old rain and metal hit me hard. Dust lay thick over a broken cot, and a rusted signal box bolted to the wall. The microphone wire hung loose, snapped near the base. A single frequency label still clung to the dial, Ranger Line 12, active 1000, 964 to 1000, 971. I brushed it with my sleeve. The metal hummed faintly under my fingers. Static, just for a second, like a dying heartbeat. Then it went quiet. I stayed up there until evening, watching the fog drift in waves below me. The forest stretched out in every direction, endless and unmarked. When I finally climbed down, the light had gone the color of steel. The woods felt wrong again, too quiet, like sound itself was holding its breath. I built another small fire, more for comfort than warmth, and sat close enough to feel the heat sting my knees. At some point, I must have dozed, because the next thing I remember is the smell of smoke gone cold and the sound static, faint but steady, coming from the pack again. Only this time, it wasn't random. There was rhythm to it, a pause, then another burst, then a whisper threading through the noise. My name, clear as daylight, Eli. I flinched so hard the firelight scattered embers into the dirt. The sound cut off the second I moved. I unzipped the pack, nothing inside but gear and the silent beacon. I held it in both hands. The green indicator light, dead for years, blinked once. I dropped it. The light blinked again. I didn't sleep. I sat up all night, watching the tree line, counting breaths, waiting for dawn that never seemed to come. Somewhere around 4, a new sound joined the static soft footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate, moving just beyond the circle of my campfire. Hello? My voice barely carried. Is someone out there? No answer. Just the faint crunch of weight shifting on stone, then silence. I killed the fire and listened. The only thing I could hear was my pulse and, far off, the tower creaking in the fog. When the sun finally bled through the trees, I found the footprints. 2 sets, one leading toward my tent, one leading away straight toward the tower. By morning, I'd convinced myself I was dealing with a trespasser, some hiker or squatter, using the old ranger lines for fun. I packed what I could, slung the rest over my shoulder, and started toward the ridge trail. The air smelled metallic again, the way it does before lightning. Halfway down the slope, my walkie, silent for years, let out a sharp pop. I froze. Then came the static, cutting in and out, followed by a single word: stop. The voice was mine. I stood there for a long time, every hair on my body raised. The forest around me seemed to contract, drawing in close until I could hear each drop of moisture sliding down the leaves. Then, just as suddenly, it went dead again. No sound, no birds, not even the wind. I turned back toward the tower. Through the fog, high above the treetops, I could see something moving on the observation deck, just a flicker of dark against the pale sky. Someone standing perfectly still, facing the woods. For one horrible moment, I thought it was my reflection, my own outline, staring back at me from the distance. But then the figure lifted an arm and pressed something to its mouth, and the static started again. The figure didn't move. It just stood there against the pale fog, arm still raised, the faint glint of metal catching the morning light. For a second, I thought I saw my own backpack slung over its shoulder. Then the static grew louder. It wasn't coming from my bag anymore. It was everywhere, bleeding through the trees, humming in the soil, vibrating the air until my teeth buzzed. I yelled something, maybe, "Who's up there?" But the sound vanished into the fog before it could echo back. The figure dropped its arm. The static stopped, and the forest exhaled again. I don't remember deciding to climb the tower. One moment, I was standing at the base, looking up into the gray, and the next, I was gripping the first rung, boots slick with dew. The metal was colder than before, so cold it burned. Each breath came out in short bursts that hung like smoke. Halfway up, the static flickered again, soft, pulsing in and out like a heartbeat. It seemed to sync with my climb. Every time I grabbed another rung, crackle. Every time I pulled myself higher, crackle. Then, faintly, between the noise, Eli. I stopped climbing. My name again. The voice was wrong, like an old recording of me slowed down and played back through sand. I looked down, but the fog had already swallowed the ground. The world below was gone. Something inside me whispered that if I turned around now, I wouldn't make it back. So I kept going. The top deck was empty. The observation cabin's door swayed open on a single hinge, bumping the frame with a hollow thunk. Thunk. I stepped inside. The smell hit first, wet wood, dust, and the faint, unmistakable tang of ozone. The signal box I'd seen yesterday was alive again, green light flickering weakly. The disconnected mic cord hung from it like a severed vein. Static filled the room in waves, building and collapsing, building again. I leaned close and whispered, "Who's doing this?" For a long moment, nothing. Then, faintly, not who. The word barely made it through the distortion. "Then what?" I asked, voice shaking. The response came slow, drawn out, remem.burr. The mic fell from my hand. There was a photograph pinned to the far wall, curled and faded with water stains. I walked closer. It showed a man in a Forest Service uniform, standing beside the same tower. Handwritten on the bottom, Ranger, Eli Porter, 1971. My stomach dropped. Same name, but it wasn't me. Couldn't be. The face was too soft, too young. Still, there was something familiar in the jawline, the shape of the eyes. I lifted the photo off the nail, and behind it was another same man, different day, sitting at a wooden desk beside a radio set identical to the one in front of me. Except this one had a second figure standing behind him, blurred, like the camera had caught motion. Whoever it was, they looked like me. The wind shifted outside. The cabin door slammed open, and for a split second, the static roared loud enough to make me cover my ears. The signal light flared green, then dimmed to red. Through the open door, I caught movement on the ladder, something climbing up fast. Boots. Or bare feet. I couldn't tell. The whole tower rattled. I backed into the corner, flashlight trembling in my hand. The first shape appeared at the top of the ladder, a hand, pale, gripping the rung. Then another, I shouted. "Stay where you are." The hand froze. Then a voice rose through the static again, close now, whispering directly into the room. "Don't leave me here." It was my voice. Everything inside me fractured in that moment. I don't remember running, only the sound of the tower groaning under my weight as I bolted down the ladder. The rungs blurred into a vertical smear of rust and cold air. Halfway down, I heard footsteps above something following, slow and deliberate, perfectly matching my pace. I didn't look up. I just jumped the last 8 feet and hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. I rolled, scrambled to my feet, and ran. The forest seemed different now. Angles didn't make sense. Trees grew closer together, crowding the trail until I could barely squeeze through. The static still followed, weaker but constant, threading through the air like an invisible wire. Every few seconds, it would pulse and drop into silence. Then my name would whisper through the gap. Always, my name. I ran until I reached the creek bed near camp. My pack lay exactly where I'd left it, but the radio beacon, the one I dropped, was gone. In its place, pressed neatly into the mud, was a small rectangle of yellowed paper. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was another photograph. Me, standing at the base of the tower, taken from above. By late afternoon, I made it back to my truck. The fog never lifted. It just turned silver with daylight. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely fit the key in the ignition. When the engine finally turned over, the radio, dead for years, crackled to life. No station, just static. Then, through the noise, "You were supposed to check in." The voice was calm, official, clipped. "I'm not a ranger," I whispered. The voice answered, "You were." Then the radio went silent. I drove until the road flattened into blacktop and the trees thinned into farmland. By the time I reached cell service, the signal bars flickered and vanished again. No connection. That night, I checked into a roadside motel outside Elkins. I left the lights on and the TV volume up just to fill the air. Sometime after midnight, the static came back. Not from the TV, this time from the wall behind the bed. It pulsed once, twice, then faded into a single, drawn-out whisper. "Still here." I didn't sleep after that. 3 weeks later, I went back. I told myself I needed proof, something to make sense of what happened. The trail was overgrown, nearly invisible, and the tower was gone. No steel, no ladder, no clearing. Just trees and a pile of rusted bolts, half buried in moss. I knelt down and brushed the dirt away until I saw something metal, a tag. It read, "Site decommissioned, 1971, the year on the photograph." I don't talk about it much anymore. The rational part of me says I must have stumbled into some ranger memorial, that exhaustion and isolation played tricks on my mind. But then, every few nights, the same thing happens. I'll wake to that faint hiss again. Not from my phone, not from any device, just in the air. And if I lie there long enough, letting my breathing match its rhythm, I start to hear the space between the noise, my name, and then, softly, like a transmission finally completing its loop, report in. Every time I hear the static, I wonder if I'm still up there on that tower, just another signal caught in the fog, waiting for someone else to listen.